Okay. Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about deploying OneDrive. You may think you have OneDrive deployed, but there's a lot to it. Have you actually covered all the bases? Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Michael Blumenthal. I've spent the last 5 years managing M365 tenants. Before that, I spent 2 decades in consulting, mostly as a SharePoint architect. Currently, I'm managing M365 for a National Research Institute of about 3,000 users. Before that, I managed M365 and architected the deployment of OneDrive Sync to 50 to 60,000 users. I've been a Microsoft MVP since 2005, and I live in suburban Chicago, Illinois. I'm also the speaker manager for M365 Chicago, which is a virtual online conference on all things M365. Our next event is November 11th. We had an event earlier this year in January. Videos from that are on our YouTube channel. Back to OneDrive. What does it mean to deploy OneDrive? Actually, let me turn my camera on here. What does it mean to deploy OneDrive? First, as I get my mouse working. So let's dig through the layers and look at the many aspects of deployment. Why do we want to deploy OneDrive? First off, OneDrives are better than network home drives. So most organizations have network home drives, which are file shares on the corporate network, and every employee gets assigned space on these network shares. However, time has passed, and those are not nearly as great as they used to be. Network home shares do not have version history, do not index their contents, so searching is slow, and do not support co-authoring, whereas OneDrive supports all of those things. Network shares are also, OneDrive is cheaper than network shares or network home drives. Network home drives are quite a bit more expensive because you've got a server to maintain, redundant storage to maintain. OneDrive, on the other hand, is included at no additional cost with your M365 subscription. You've got, whether you've got an E1, E3, F3, E5, you get OneDrive included there. Additionally, when you deploy OneDrive and use known folder move, which is a OneDrive feature that I'll talk about in a little bit here, you protect your local user files on that machine. And that means laptop replacements and upgrades are much, much easier because you don't have to worry about the users, or you don't have to worry about moving those files. You can save that machine, in other words, reimage it, or you can replace the machine, and the user simply needs to log back in again, and then all their files come back, and because they sync back down. This is also protection from ransomware. OneDrive has a feature that lets you roll back all the files in your OneDrive to any time in the last 30 days. So if a laptop gets infected with ransomware, all the files get encrypted. Those encrypted files sync up to OneDrive. That's okay. Trash that machine, get a new machine, log in, roll your files back 30 days, and then you're back in business, or to whatever point in time before the ransomware happened. So that's why we want to deploy OneDrive. But OneDrive deployment is actually more than just deployment. It's actually operationalizing OneDrive. And what I mean by that, and this is a term that I only learned about once I got into internal IT versus when I was in consulting, we never thought about this. But operationalizing OneDrive is much more than deployment and really involves these 6 components. First of all, sure, there's turning on the license for all the users you want to have it, but then there's deploying OneDrive Sync, the desktop app, And then after that, once you have the sync app deployed, you have not just the sync app running, but you want to use the known folder move experience, and you want the users to go through the FRE, the first run experience. OneDrive is not just a web experience and a desktop experience. There's also a mobile app for it. So you need to plan for that as well. And then your service desk needs to be ready to support OneDrive and need to drive user adoption to actually get value from having the capability. It's not just about storing files. It's about getting people to change how they share files and how they work together on files. Looks like that's this. Let me see if we can turn that on again. Hello, I'm back. Okay. So let's take a deep dive into each of these. OneDrive doesn't have its own license or service plan. In M365 admin, when you look under licenses and apps, there is no individual license for OneDrive. It's actually managed by the SharePoint license. So the SharePoint license is the OneDrive license. When you add that license, then that gives the user where you assign that license to, that gives them the ability to go to the OneDrive website and see this file storage area. If you have not run a PowerShell script to force the provisioning of that site, then it will be provisioned the first time they visit the OneDrive site. And for corporate OneDrives, because remember there's a consumer offering too, for corporate OneDrives, it's tenant-my. So if your tenant is Contoso, then it's contoso-my.sharepoint.com. When you remove the license, on the other hand, nothing happens. The OneDrive does not go away when the license is removed. However, when the user is removed from Active Directory, then a timer starts. And depending on the interval you've got configured, whether it's 30 days, 90 days, 120 days, whatever number you pick within the range, that's at the end of that time is when the OneDrive goes away. So what the user sees when they have the license is they've got the web experience. And this is a screenshot of that with all my folder names redacted, so you don't normally see all the black lines. I just don't want you to see my folder names. And so this is the web experience for file storage, and it's good for what it is, and but working with files through a web interface is not the most efficient experience, and that's where OneDrive Sync comes in. OneDrive Sync lets you use File Explorer on your desktop to manage and work with your files. So let's talk about what Sync actually does. And think of Sync doing four things. There's four scenarios it supports. It supports 2 OneDrive Sync scenarios and 2 SharePoint Sync scenarios. There is no separate SharePoint Sync engine. It is OneDrive Sync that syncs both of them. So first off, we have the OneDrive-company name. So this is where OneDrive Sync is syncing your corporate OneDrive to your local machine, and it's going to sync it to a folder called OneDrive- whatever your company name is, so OneDrive-Contoso, in your user profile folder. So again, on a Windows machine, C users, whatever your username is, there'll be a folder there, OneDrive- whatever your tenant name is. If you allow people to, they can also sync their consumer OneDrive to their machine, and that will be same similar path also in user profile, but just OneDrive, or we'll say OneDrive Personal. Now, if they go ahead and sync SharePoint libraries, those will show up either in user profile and just company name, not OneDrive, just the company name. So it'd be username/Contoso, for example. And then in that folder, any of the SharePoint libraries you sync will show up as folders. Now, if you have been invited into another tenant to collaborate, for example, a vendor might invite you in to collaborate on a proposal or some kind of document you are working on together, or customer. And if you're a guest in another tenant, but you have the ability to sync content from those files, then when you sync that SharePoint library, it'll show up again with in a folder in a folder in your user profile folder, but with the name of their tenant as the root. And this is all file system level, but when you're actually looking at File Explorer, what you see is the blue clouds and the blue office buildings. So here, blue office building, this is the name of my personal demo tenant. Here is the blue cloud for my OneDrive in that tenant. Here's the blue cloud for OneDrive Personal. In many corporate environments, we don't want you to be able to access your personal consumer cloud storage, and so you would set up policies to block that, and then you would not have access to this. Another word about licensing. With the E1 license, you get a terabyte of storage and the ability to sync. With E3 and E5, you start with a terabyte of storage per user, and you have the ability to sync. You can actually go up to 25 terabytes of storage per user. If you need to go beyond that, then they assign you other SharePoint site collections. However, with the F1 or now actually F3 license, this slide comes before they renamed F1 to F3. You get only 2 gig of storage, and you don't actually have the right to sync. And that's because the F3, that frontline worker license, is intended for users who never have access to a laptop, will never use a Windows or a Mac where there would be a sync client. They'll only use the mobile experience. So it makes sense for them to have online storage, but they don't need the actual sync client. And when we're talking about the mobile app, that's not a sync experience. That's more of a mobile version of the web app, or at least it lets you navigate your files, and you can open your files and they open into the Office mobile app. But it's not a sync experience in the same way that you have on the desktop. So the next piece of OneDrive Sync that you need to understand is KFM, Known Folder Move. This is also called PC Folder Backup. And what that does is protects desktop, documents, and pictures, but it does not protect some other known folders. Now, known folders, again, are these special Windows folders that show up as different than your average folder, usually special iconography, usually under quick links or shortcuts, and so they tend to be for particular data types. So you've got 3D objects, downloads, music, videos, and favorites that are also known folders, but they're not involved in known folder move for OneDrive. Known folder move for OneDrive only does desktop documents and pictures. Now, when you run KFM, when by policy or by user action, you have OneDrive Sync do the PC folder backup, what it does is this. The desktop folder, which is normally in the user profile, directly as a folder directly in the user profile folder, gets moved one layer deeper. So instead of being username/desktop, it's username/ whatever the name of OneDrive-tenant is, and then desktop. So it gets moved, pushed down one layer in the folder hierarchy, gets moved to within your OneDrive-company folder, and that's true for documents, desktop, and pictures. If there are files open when it's trying to do that move, you may get errors, and you may see that you have you may still see you have documents, desktop, and pictures in their original place with a few folders left, and then you also have documents, desktop, and pictures in their new place with most of the files moved. The other thing is you've got those shortcuts in the system for where documents, desktop, and pictures are, and you'll see that those shortcuts get updated to use these new paths over here. Another thing that happens with the known folder move is if you have OneNote notebooks in Documents or Desktop, they go through a special process when they get moved to OneDrive. The local file system format of OneNote notebooks is different from how they're stored in the cloud. And so what happens is that it goes through a three-step process. First, OneDrive Sync will upload the notebook, then it'll convert it, and that happens almost as one step. But then it will replace your local notebook with a shortcut. So before, when you had a local notebook, that gets actually deleted and replaced by a URL shortcut link. And then I've got a side note here for enterprise deployments. Use the Office that comes with, the OneNote that comes with Office, not the OneNote for Windows 10. OneNote for Windows 10 has been deprecated, and OneNote for Office, or what it alternately used to be called OneNote 2016, now looks like OneNote 365. That's the version to use going forward. The app itself is not involved in this move. The conversion logic is all within the Sync client. But then when you open if you go to your file system and open that shortcut that it leaves behind for where the notebook is now, it'll open in the web, and then you can from there open it back in the desktop app. So the next thing is, how do you push OneDrive, the Sync client, out to thousands of machines? Most organizations already have a way to deploy software to all their, quote, endpoints, all their workstations. At the two organizations where I was involved in OneDrive deployment, my current one and my previous one, the tool set we used was SCCM, which is System Center Configuration Manager, and that's a Microsoft product for managing software configuration on endpoints, and then the Cloud Management Gateway. And the Cloud Management Gateway became particularly important during the pandemic when people were remote. SCCM originally was geared to manage workstations and push software to workstations when they were on the corporate network. When you're remote, if you're not on VPN, SCCM can't get to you unless you set up Cloud Management Gateway, and then the machines can check in through the Cloud Management Gateway and still get updates even if they aren't VPN'd in. So me as a cloud guy working with a team that did desktop deployments 3 years ago was a new thing for me. But when you're thinking about deploying OneDrive Sync, whoever in your organization manages the desktop and desktop deployment is going to be a key partner of yours. Next thing I want to point out is about mobile. OneDrive is, again, across all three platforms: web, mobile, desktop, both Windows and Mac. But mobile is often overlooked in initial deployment and shouldn't be. For one, there are security things that you should be doing for your Office applications. I guess my video again. There are security things you should be doing for Office applications, and that is often referred to as MAM or MDM. MAM is Mobile Application Management. MDM is Mobile Device Management. And so that's how granular you are managing your end users' mobile devices. Are you managing application by application? Are you managing the entire device? And then there's data loss protection policies you can put in place. And those are about, can I copy data from an Office application that's working with corporate data to an Office application or other applications of the system that are not corporate applications or corporate instances of an application. So if you've got your policy set up, you won't be able to copy a file from OneDrive to OneDrive Consumer or to another application, or if you highlight text in, say, a SharePoint or a OneNote page, you won't be able to copy those into an email message that is not from your corporate email address. The other thing about OneDrive on mobile is that there are some things that it's optimized for that don't make as much sense or don't make any sense in either web or desktop. So I want to switch now to this quick little video that demonstrates some of those. Let me make sure. And let me switch headsets so you can hear the audio. Okay. And that is not working either. So we'll just play it and use the closed captioning. But those are on. See, quickly captured documents, pictures, and photos through OneDrive with intelligent cropping and contrast management. Mark it up. And because these are based on using the camera in your phone, these are things that doesn't make sense to do on the desktop or through the web generally. And then you can save this to OneDrive or SharePoint. And then share it with other people. And then there's some ability to scan documents and import tables in a very intelligent way. So you're not actually just capturing a picture, but actually converting it to a textual table. And when you do that, it's scannable, or searchable rather. So those are some of the capabilities of OneDrive, the mobile app. And again, that's part of the deployment, part of your operationalization. You need to plan for the mobile experience as well. Moving along to support readiness. In order to fully operationalize OneDrive at your organization, your support team, your service desk needs to be ready. So have you trained your help desk in supporting OneDrive? Do they know how to use OneDrive? Do they use OneDrive themselves? Do they know how to troubleshoot OneDrive? Can you tag the incidents that come in as OneDrive related, and can you report on those? Do you know how many incidents you have relating to OneDrive, or really in the bigger picture, can you report on incidents by M365 workload over time? So those are key support readiness pieces. At my previous employer, one of the things we did was we put together an hour-long workshop on everything that support people needed to know about installing and troubleshooting OneDrive and OneDrive Sync. And I'm going to share with you some of those top troubleshooting things that we've seen. Number one is sync issues. Number two is people not understanding how to stop sync before they delete something. Number three is the SharePoint recycle bin and how to use that, and the difference between the admin experience for that and the user experience for that. Talk about troubleshooting known folder move. There's also desktop documents, pictures, and making sure that those are pointing to the right location. I've seen some workstations where the OneDrive deployment has gotten quite messy and confusing, and things are pointed to the wrong places, and users don't know if they're storing files in a place that's going to sync or not. I'll show you how to check the version of OneDrive, and then also there's uninstalling and reinstalling OneDrive as well. So let's look at sync issues. And so there's two kinds of sync issues. The one, broadly speaking, one is conflicting changes where OneDrive will give you a pop-up saying, hey, there's some changes we could not merge. Oh, I'm going to try this one more time. OneDrive will give you a pop-up saying there's some kinds of changes we can't merge. And then what you do is you open those files in the Office document that created them. So one of the key things to understand here is that when you're inside, or when you have a document open, it's the Office app that is responsible for the syncing involved in co-authoring and keeping that up to date with what's on the server. Especially when you have autosave turned on, it's the application itself that is doing that syncing, that saving and syncing. However, when the document is closed, that's when it is OneDrive that is responsible for syncing it. So anytime you see those error messages about, hey, we couldn't merge these changes, most of the time you just need to open the file in whichever appropriate Office application, and that Office application will either resolve those issues instantaneously or walk you through some sort of decision process about what to keep. Now, the other scenario we've seen is about people getting to the end of a project. They've been syncing a SharePoint library for that project. The project is over. They no longer need this folder of SharePoint library on their machine, and they go and delete it from their machine, and they don't realize that unintentionally or that by design syncs up, and now they've removed all those files, not just from their laptop, but from the SharePoint site as well. And you get panic calls from other people on the team, hey, where'd all these files go? So if you go to the OneDrive desktop client and go into settings, you'll see a couple of things. You'll see a list of the folders that are syncing, the top level folders that are syncing, and you'll see those links to stop syncing. You'll also have an option to unlink OneDrive, the OneDrive sync app from your Office account, and that it will stop syncing everything, and that's basically a good step to do before you uninstall the OneDrive client. So let's talk a bit more about what happens when you get that panic phone call and you've got team members saying, all our SharePoint files are gone. And you ask, did anyone delete everything from SharePoint? No, none of us deleted anything from SharePoint. But, and you can see this in the audit log, or you can possibly find this out by talking to a team member, is that someone cleaned up those files on their local machine, and then those files synced up, and those deletions rather synced up, and so all the content of that SharePoint library vanished, and it's all in the recycle bin. Now, there's two points there. One is, if you are looking at the audit log, you may notice that the application that is reported as being the client there, it may in some cases appear as SkySync, which is a previous name for OneDrive Sync. And then in order to fix this and do a bulk restore of all these files that were sync deleted, you want to either have the user who did the deletions go to that SharePoint site and go into the recycle bin. And you want the user to do it rather than the admin, because the user will see only their own, but admins will see everybody's deletes, which could be all sorts of unrelated deletes. And that can be also from other lists and libraries. It will all be in the same recycle bin if they're all in the same site. So you send the user there, they can select all their stuff and undelete. Depending on how many files there are, that could be fairly time consuming, as they have to select and page through all their files. Or especially if you've prepared this ahead of time, there are PowerShell scripts that you can run to undelete just things from that particular user. So another troubleshooting step I want to point out to you is, again, for known folder move. And in Windows 10 and 11 on the desktop, you'll see your known folders and the ones that are getting backed up, desktop documents and pictures. If you right click on those, you'll see that they have the folder path and the location property. And those should say the OneDrive path that has your tenant name in it. And if it doesn't, then then it is backing things up to the consumer OneDrive, and obviously you don't want that. Another thing that's important to check, of course, is the version that of the OneDrive sync client. Although OneDrive can be deployed with Office, and Office updates on a particular cadence, whether monthly or semi-annually. OneDrive has its own cadence I'll talk about in a moment here. So if you want to know if you're on the latest build or what's new in the build that's on that particular machine, you go to the blue cloud in the system tray, go to settings, go to about, and there is this link there. The version number is actually a link, and it takes you to the release notes page. And you can see what version rolled out when. Again, there's it's a OneDrive sync has its own update cadence. They do a production release every 2 to 4 weeks. If you choose to have machines on the deferred ring, then you'll only get updates every 2 to 3 months. But those updates, as long as all the ports are open, all happen automatically, and they're very quick. Like if you're not specifically watching for the update to run, you won't even notice it's happened. And so most end users will be completely unaware of OneDrive updating. As I said, it's a different cadence than Office desktop apps. It's also a different cadence than Microsoft Teams. Even though they all can be deployed together as part of Office update, once it lands, it updates on its own. And there's number of lessons learned that I also want to go through, because these were hard-won lessons that from the deployment I did in the 2019-2020 timeframe. One or two of these things, the technology has improved since then and aren't so much of a challenge. But if you're planning a global deployment of OneDrive, you want to know about these things. So some of the things that complicated our OneDrive deployment were regulatory considerations. We had offices in Germany and offices in China, and we had to leave those out of the deployment. Germany has a workers' council that has to approve deployment of new software services, and so that was a separate step to get them approved. Eventually, I believe we did, and we rolled out to them. China, because of their data residency requirements, we never rolled out OneDrive to them. Firewall issues, especially for machines on the corporate network or working through a corporate controlled web proxy. There's certain ports that OneDrive needs to operate, and of course, some of those were closed when we first started. The first run experience is a tutorial that you really do want your end users to go through, because it teaches them some key concepts about OneDrive. And so we wanted to document that in some of our information for what does the user see when they run this for the first time. And Microsoft was changing the visuals of those pages while we were trying to document it. Support for OneNote and that OneNote upgrade process only came out in the sync client from version 19.202 onward, and we'd started the process before then, so OneNote notebooks were an issue. But by the time we got to high-scale deployment, we had Microsoft released the version that supported it. Some of our group policies got in our way. We had some group policies that did folder redirection, and those conflicted with some of the ways that known folder move works. I'll talk about that more in a minute. We were supporting 3 different operating systems, which all had slightly different OneDrive behaviors. Things like files on demand were only became available in Windows 10 1709, and so the earlier versions didn't have that. And so there were other considerations, like if you synced too much stuff, you could run your machine out of disk space. We had a history of coming from a MySite migration and so pilot group of users that were had installed the client before there was a tenant rename, and so they had some legacy URLs there that we could see who had been running OneDrive before the tenant rename and who was running it after, because the way that OneDrive was labeled in that the next to the blue cloud in File Explorer, the tenant name had changed. We had to come up with a retention policy, and so something like if the contents of your if files in your OneDrive have not been modified for, every company can choose their own interval here, but I mean let's use 3 years as an example, hadn't been touched for 3 years, then it would be deleted. Employee lifecycle was another important piece to understand, and there are policies and procedures around that too. So some organizations have privacy concerns about you giving access automatically to a person's manager, and so my previous employer had a highly complex workflow of who needed to approve someone else getting access to a person's OneDrive, and so that was part of the employee life cycle, that we did not automatically grant the manager access to that person's OneDrive, and if they needed it, there was this complex of approvals they had to go through. Another piece to understand is that when you are deploying OneDrive Sync, you are deploying it to machines, but you're communicating about it to users. So you need to know who is using which machine so that you know what to tell them and can target your emails appropriately to them about when they're going to get this new experience on their machine. When we deployed OneDrive Sync with SCCM, we would get confirmation, yes, the deployment package ran, but then we needed to know, did known folder move happen? Did what known folder move finish? Did it finish syncing up documents, desktop, and pictures? And the reporting at that time was rather primitive, and so we ended up having to do some reading registries on machines at scale to get a sense of, did known folder move finish. We also had to tweak. It took several times to get the package that SCCM deployed to work the way we wanted it to in terms of what it was telling end users about what it was doing, if it was interactive or not. We actually decided we wanted it interactive, so people would hopefully read what it was saying and realize that, oh, hey, I'm getting OneDrive. We had some users who were surprised by KFM launch, and some of these were some of the legacy users who had been using OneDrive before from an old pilot program. And depending on group policy settings and folder redirection policies, sometimes KFM wouldn't work. There were some users whose document folders were being redirected to a network share. We had to undo that before a known folder move could redirect it into the OneDrive folder. Our corporate store where policy of what are appropriate locations for data storage had to be updated, because things like there are rules about where PII and other sensitive data can be stored, and we need to make sure that because OneDrive and a workstation were syncing, we were saying the same thing about what was okay to store in OneDrive and what's okay to store on that part of your C drive. People who needed to move their files around to comply with storeware needed time to do that. We had an issue where some people were concerned about this folder called shared with everyone that showed up in some but not all OneDrives, and that was a a legacy of having come from an on-premise or an effectively on-premise my site implementation, where way back when, several years ago, every OneDrive was deployed with a folder called shared with everyone, which did that. Everything in that folder was shared with everyone in the organization. But after that period of that point in time, Microsoft stopped provisioning that. So the users who found that their OneDrives had that folder were concerned, am I sharing this with the public in general? Am I sharing it with people in the organization? Why do I have this? How do I get rid of it? I talked about folder redirection, and then also the other element is change freezes, where we could not deploy OneDrive during certain times of year because any kind of changes were forbidden during those change freeze windows. Now I want to move on to user adoption and understanding what a user adoption looks like, how we measure it, what behaviors we're looking for, and some of the training options that you have and also may not know about. There's three sources of analytics, and that is the OneDrive Sync Health Report, the usage reporting in M365 Admin, and the productivity score. And then I'll talk more about behavior and training after that. So if we look at OneDrive Sync Health, which, by the way, is not in M365 Admin, it is over in config.office.com. So not at admin.microsoft.com, but at config.office.com. And this gives you, if you set it up, and to get it set up, you need to push group policy to tell all your workstations to go and report. You will get this nice dashboard, and you'll also get this detail report. Now, the one challenge with this detail report is you cannot export it. However, it is searchable, and it tells you whether there are any sync errors for that user on that machine, and also are desktop documents and pictures backed up. It also tells you if their version of OneDrive is up to date, OneDrive Sync. The places that I have that as an admin, I look at this report and I see I need to do something are when I see that there's users who there are users who don't have known folders backed up, because then their laptops are not protected. Again, if you're backing up documents, desktop, and pictures, and users only store files on their laptop in synced locations, whether it's documents, desktop, and pictures, or in SharePoint libraries that they've synced, if they lose that laptop, it's not that big a deal in terms of not worrying about lost data that needs to be recreated, because that data's been syncing, and so there's a copy in OneDrive or in SharePoint. But users who are not syncing and they're storing stuff in on their laptop, that laptop gets lost or stolen, it's a big deal, not only because of if it's a theft, then there's other issues there, but if it's just lost or if it's damaged and they need to get a new one, then they've lost work. So one thing you can do here then is take this report, look for the nones, and have your service desk reach out to those people and try to get their machines properly using KFM. The same thing if they're if they're only backing up documents, why aren't they backing up desktop and pictures? Sync errors, you can drill in on that, see what the error is. Depending on how high touch you want to be, you could actually probably help the users with that, but most of the time it's in their face enough, and all they have to do is open the document in Office, and it'll in the Office app, whichever Office app, and it'll resolve the error. But it's the lack of complete known folder backup that I would be most worried about from an IT perspective. Moving over to user usage analytics, which are in the M365 admin portal. You start off at on the overview page. There's this one widget, OneDrive files, and that shows you how many files are stored in OneDrive, and that can be thousands, that can be hundreds of thousands, that can be millions of files. And as you deploy OneDrive Sync, you're going to see this number go up and up. Again, you've got a terabyte of storage for every person in the organization that has an Office license, unless they're an F3 license. But if they've got any of the E licenses, they have at least a terabyte. And so you'll see the amount of storage in OneDrive climb. If you drill into this usage analytics, though, you'll see a number of different charts, and this is the 2 activity charts, and you can see here what we see with these trends is, sure, people are viewing and editing files and syncing files, but there's not a lot of sharing going on. So that's a missed opportunity. Now, depending on the policies for OneDrive, you can set it so people can't use OneDrive for external sharing, and there can be good security reasons for that. Here we see that that's probably what's happened in this organization because there is no external sharing. Likewise over here, and this is a very small tenant. I think this is actually from my demo tenant. The number of people syncing and viewing is there, but there's no one sharing, and at least not within the last 30 days. And you've got a choice here of past 7 days, past 30 days, and past 180 days. So if you see that people aren't sharing internally, they're probably not getting full value from having OneDrive and Office, and they may not understand how to co-author, for example. Let's look at the usage set of analytics as well. We can see here we've got total number of accounts in the organization and total number of active accounts. Well, this is my demo tenant where I've got 6 users, and one of them is my mother-in-law, and so she's not using OneDrive, which is not much of a surprise to anyone. And so that explains the gap between active users and total users. But in a corporate environment, you would want to be working to drive the number of active users much closer to total users. For files, it is, on the other hand, quite common to have a lot more files stored than active files. I mean, I've seen in a busy corporate tenant, only maybe 20% of the files are active files. And then you will also see and that's here, active files versus total. In storage, we'll see this line rise over time. Now moving on to productivity score, which is also in the M365 admin, again, admin.microsoft.com. There's content collaboration. And this is a whole suite of metrics. Let's take a closer look at this. And one of the nice things here is that some of these are measured against peer benchmarks. So you see the overall content collaboration score. You can drill into that, and you see metrics like this. What percent of the people in your organization are collaborating on online files? And you see there are grouped into readers, creators, and collaborators. So readers, they're given an Office file, and they open it, they may edit it. Hopefully they're given it by a link rather than attachment, but the collaborators are the ones who are more likely to be using more of the capabilities of OneDrive and co-authoring. And so you want to see people not just creating and reading, but collaborating, because that helps people produce documents faster. And then a different view of those same numbers, and again, you see usage rise over time. Some percent of people who use Office create files in OneDrive or SharePoint. So yeah, if they're not creating files in OneDrive or SharePoint, where are they? Well, depending on your organization, there may be legitimate answers for why this is not going to get to 100%. Let's say we've got certain sensitive information, PII information, contractual obligations where we can't store things in the cloud. Okay, well, so we store it on a network share or some other appropriate repository, and then we expect that this percent is going to be impacted by that. But one thing I would say is when you have a much higher percentage of OneDrive than SharePoint in terms of where people are storing things, there is a risk of data loss because OneDrives go away when people go away, whereas SharePoint, the SharePoint sites can stick around forever unless you have retention policies and lifecycle management for SharePoint. So it may a much higher OneDrive storage use versus SharePoint may indicate that you're at risk of losing team assets that are stored in the wrong place. Here's another indicator of people needing training on OneDrive. And the nice thing about these productivity scores is that they have this link to view-related content, and that tends to talk to you about training materials or marketing materials you can use to drive people to use the tools in the most productive way, help people understand how to share links to files rather than sending attachments. I've been in large environments where the differential here is much larger, where almost no one was sending links, and that was a big focus for for future educational campaigns. Again, depending on the policies that you have about whether or not you allow external sharing in SharePoint and OneDrive, you would expect to see differentials here. About most, you want to see a high amount of internal sharing, and then depending on what your policies are in external sharing, you would expect to see appropriate numbers there. Again, a measure of collaboration, and hopefully you see people collaborating with each other through Office and not just working independently and then emailing things around, because that's going to cause inefficiencies. So we went through the analytics, and so let's talk a bit about those behaviors that we want to drive to improve the productivity and that we should see reflected in those analytics. Co-authoring is a big one. I mean, but it really starts with first getting people to store their files in syncing folders. So if people are used to creating files and working files on their laptop, then when they go to save a file for the first time, anytime they create a new file, we want them to save that into a syncing folder, whether that's documents, desktop, or pictures, or a SharePoint library they've synced. And when you and then to work with other people on them, we want to see people sharing links rather than sending attachments. And when you first log into OneDrive Sync as a user, it automatically syncs your OneDrive, but it doesn't automatically sync SharePoint. There's group policies where you can force it to sync some libraries, but basically you want users to think about which SharePoint libraries they're working with, and then you want them to sync those SharePoint libraries too. And then finally, you want to see co-authoring. You want to help people work together, and this is often something that gets adopted team by team. So let's drill into that a bit more, and we'll also talk about the some training options. First of all, people need to understand what co-authoring is and what it looks like. And one way I've done that is just showing these pictures, which is, hey, I'm in Word and I see other people are here because I see them in the toolbar, and I see their cursors are labeled with their initials. And so each of us can be working on a different paragraph in the same document and producing this content much more speedily because we're all working at the same time. In Excel, similar experience, and it's a particular cell that's labeled where that person is. To take that to the next step, I've tried to find many ways to communicate the benefits of sending sharing links rather than sending attachments. And so I put together this 2-page comic to try to get the point across. This is what I call my co-authoring comic, and it shows what happens when someone sends an attachment and what happens when they send an edge link instead. And that is something that I'm making available to the public. And if you're interested in it, you can just shoot me an email. Now, in terms of communicating to your users about OneDrive, really about any M365 change you want them to adopt, email is insufficient. We know from metrics that if you just send everyone in your company an email and it comes from IT and it talks about, hey, you should use OneDrive, many people won't read it, and you need to, well, overall, we know people are overwhelmed by the volume of email that they get, and they just can't keep up. And you can even see that in the productivity score and email metrics usage and analytics as well. But so the approach then is, how do I get my message through? I give it to them through different communication channels, many communication channels, and over and over again. So if your company has newsletters, departmental newsletters, the company-wide newsletters, if you can get a paragraph into that newsletter talking about, again, the end user benefits of OneDrive and what's in it for them and when is it going to come and give them something actionable, then that will be more impactful than if you just do an IT newsletter, which people will tend to ignore, saying I don't have time for this, especially people in the business. If newsletters come from their own department head, they're more likely to read it than if it comes from IT. Digital signage. Now, I realize that a lot of people are working remotely, but there are some people in offices, and from the before times, I mean, companies have digital signage solutions. If you can get slides added to that that talk about OneDrive is coming, here's what OneDrive is, here's the benefits of using it, or even put the co-authoring comic up on the digital signage, things like that help get the message out. Getting 5 minutes to talk in a departmental meeting, providing in-context help, such as third-party solutions like Visual SP or WalkMe or others, where they go to any of the M365 websites and there's and there's a little tab that shows up or a little icon that shows up they can click for contextual training. That can be a very effective way. Instructor-led training is one of the things that you can offer. It tends to have more time commitment, but there's actually some very affordable ways to offer it. And large corporations may already have contracts with some provider courseware providers like Directions Training, but any company that is big enough to have a support agreement with Microsoft, you have an account team, and all you have to do is ask your account team for training options. And one of the training options that they have, I'll talk to you about in a minute here. So there's a couple ways to get instructor-led training. Another way to get people to use OneDrive is to get OneDrive involved in processes they care about. So if you are an employee and you have to get a statement of work approved by your manager or a proposal approved by your manager, if you as an IT person work with that manager to say, manager, only review these documents if they come in as links, don't accept them if they're sent as attachments, then the employees reporting to that manager will start changing their behavior because they want their documents reviewed. You can also have a champions program, and you also can either as part of that or adjacent to it, work with influencer communities and think about what communities within your organization you can educate to have the most impact. For example, admin assistants, executive assistants are a good influencer community. And champions programs are when you're sort of building your own influencer community, and that's again yet another communication channel. So one thing I wanted to share with you about in-person, or rather instructor-led training. This is not necessarily in person. In fact, this particular offering is virtual. You may remember that in the before the pandemic, Microsoft had retail stores throughout the country, and when they closed those down during the pandemic, a lot of the staff there shifted to training roles. So you can now get instructor-led training from Microsoft employees on a variety of topics here, and I'll have a link in my slide notes. But you can see here, Microsoft Cloud Storage, OneDrive for Business, and SharePoint Online. And so that's an hour class. We actually did this at my previous employer, where we engaged with that team of trainers and had them do a slightly customized version of their course to make it appropriate to the constraints and policies of the organization. And then they offered that several times, and can't remember if we recorded that or not. And then there was also a corporate training company we worked with that delivered similar training as well. And that could be even more customized. So let's review. Operationalizing OneDrive is more than just turning on the license and saying, hey, you've got OneDrive. It is giving them the license, deploying sync, getting them to go through the first run experience in sync, getting known folder move to run and complete syncing all their files in desktop documents and pictures, making sure that you are supporting OneDrive Mobile and have the right security policies in place, making sure your service desk is ready, and having a plan for user adoption. I'll open it up to questions now.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
In the discussion earlier, there was a question about apps that write or access files or data locally on the hard drive. Now, I think there's apps that write to different folders, but if there's anything that writes to the My Documents folder, right, and it needs to access that. Now, I don't know how many apps do that. I know that some custom built or have done it before.
Some line of business applications. This was a concern. So it depends on how they do it. So known folder. So My Documents is a known folder, and that means that there's a way to reference it that is independent of what the physical path is. And so if their code references it correctly, it won't mind that it's been moved one layer deeper. If it doesn't, if it's looking for the literal path and figuring out like, okay, here's user profile, so it must be here, then it's going to get confused, or it's going to write to a folder that isn't synced.
Right. So could you during known but it's because it's in My Documents, that's the problem, right? If it was, could you choose that folder to not be moved as part of folder sync so that it stays in place?
You can. I'd have to go back and look at the group policies to see how you would configure that. I know interactively, you do, I believe, have the option to check which, like,
of the three, you could deselect one of them. The thing is that, again, if users are storing stuff there and they're not stored in any other system, then if the laptop is lost, damaged, stolen, there goes the file.
Right. Jason Hughes, did I represent that correctly?
Yeah, you did. It was kind of an internal debate, and I don't think we do have a couple of proprietary applications, and I think they were, they've been around for over 20 years. So when they were originally created, they were created to reference the documents folder. So when we started to have some users use known folder move, it started to break some of those links. So they were asking me the solution, and I thought, well, as developers, I kind of assumed they would know that. But
yeah, I
Michael
would
just
look at
mentioned,
I would say, from a development perspective, look at the code and find where it makes assumptions about that path and see if they're referencing my documents. There's supposed to be some way to reference them, and we did not get into remediating code when I ran into this, but my understanding is that there are ways to properly reference known folder, so that the API will get you to the right location, so that you're not building that location out in your code.
okay, so do you think that's better than just telling them to? I think Ed had mentioned they should be using a different folder in the application, like the app data folder.
Right.
Instead
So yeah, that's another point, is that there are, and I've not done Windows desktop development for forever, so I don't know what the best practices are about where to put application data. But I think what Ed just said sounds right. And then the other thing is, what is it that they're writing? So if you want to store it in their OneDrive instead, then there's a whole different set of APIs where your application could write to their OneDrive or to SharePoint. So it really depends on what you're trying to do.
Okay.
And if your application is, like, if it's that old, then there's even a bigger question of, should the whole thing just be re-architected entirely because it's been written for before the days of cloud computing, and now maybe that's an opportunity to totally reimagine it.
Actually, I think they're actually doing that. So good point. And they're in the middle of doing that, but until they're finished with it, this is kind of an issue. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
Michael, how much time do you have until your session is up?
I think it was about 10 minutes ago. I think we are about at time,
yeah.
Jeff. Okay. I don't know if you and Michael want to take it offline.
We will. I got to talk to him about OneNote.
All right.
So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Well, this has definitely been a great hot topic, Michael, and certainly appreciate your time and your first time speaking with us. We definitely welcome you and can't wait to have you back. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Really awesome. All right, so let's go ahead, and if there's any more questions for Michael, feel free, put it in the chat. Michael, if you need to leave, I can always collect those and get questions over to you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I can stick around for a little bit more, but I do have, I think at the top of the hour, I have to leave.
All right, sounds great. Well, thanks again. Tom, let's go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you for being here. We are very much looking forward to your top 20 and can't wait to get started. Oh, and I love your shirt as well.
I was going to say I did wear my lucky shirt here, which I don't remember where I got this from.
Yeah, that's strange.
Yeah, opened up the drawer and poof, there it was. So normally I like to use presenter mode, but it's like I also want to be able to watch the chat going on, and I didn't want to have somebody moderate that for me. So I'm going to kind of fly blind with what you see here on the presentations, and If I sound like I'm done with the tip and I hit enter and there's more to the tip, then yeah, we'll just fly with it. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started here. Hopefully it's going to actually, there we go. So I'm Tom Duff. There's all my particular contacts. I work for an insurance company in the Pacific Northwest. I actually live in Plymouth outside of Minneapolis, but I pretty much work on Pacific time because I moved out from Portland, Oregon. So it's kind of humorous because my wife is also a user adoption training specialist who works for Planet Technologies on the East Coast. So in our house, whenever we throw a timeout, it's like, is that my time? Is that your time? Or is that our time? So we just kind of work it that way, and we consider kitchen time central, and that's what we're both synchronized to. So let's get started. I've got 20 tips here. I'm going to move fairly quickly. Hopefully I will be able to keep an eye over here on the side. So if you see me not looking at the camera, it's because I'm checking chat to see if something's over there. First tip, chat with self. I love this. This is such a cool feature. But when it first came out, I hadn't had a chance to actually let my internal people know. And they're like, why do I want to talk to myself? Well, because this is a really cool way to make quick notes. So once this is rolled out to your Teams client, what happens when you go out to Teams, what you're going to see here in chat is you will automatically see a pinned item, which is you sitting there, and you'll see this nice little opening saying this is your space. Again, we did have some people who actually deleted this or unpinned it going, I don't know what this is for. And in some cases, we had some people who couldn't get back to it and couldn't pin it. They would attempt to chat with themselves. It would say, oh, you can. And then they would type a message and it would say, sorry, that person doesn't exist. So if you happen to have somebody who deletes their pinned area there for the chat, sometimes if they just close Teams and go back into it, it will restore the pin. Other times, if you delete the Teams cache and then restart Teams, it will repin itself. But this is what you will see when you first go out there. And what I find really nice about this is, again, quick little notes to yourself. Run errand after work. Here's a file I want to talk about. If I want to send, graphic images to myself, I can. I don't know why I would, but hey, it's fun. So some people were like, well, why would I want to do that? I can just jot it down on a piece of paper. I could use OneNote. I've got other ways to do this. This may not be the way that your work style goes, but if you're in Teams all day long, you're in chat all day long, this can be an easy way for you to keep track of things that you need to do. And as you do them, you can just go in and delete the chat message. So it can be kind of a variable to-do list without you having to have a Teams notebook on the side and dock it to the one side and stuff like that. Those are all different ways to do it, but this is just something that works really well for people. Again, I happen to love this one. So number 2, this was one that Sandra Mahan, my coworker, came up with and found it. It's really nice. So you return from PTO, you log into Outlook, you've got a dozen messages that pop up saying, what about this meeting? What about this meeting? But they're all gone, but you have to clear them off. So what you can do is you can go into your Outlook options screen, and this is in the Outlook client, go down to advanced and select the automatically dismiss reservations for past calendar events. And then when you sign on after you've come back from PTO and you open up Outlook, all those automatic notices are gone. You don't have to worry about them because you don't have any way that you could have attended them. You weren't here. So that's one thing you might want to do just to make things a little easier and to clean out your inbox a bit for when you come back from PTO. Again, this works well for some people. Other people are like, hey, I don't mind. I don't get that many meeting invites. Just use it as you would like to. I do have something in chat. Is chat with self a one-on-one subject to retention policy set for normal chats? Mark, good question. I don't know. We don't use retention policies in our environment very often. I know that's a whole different discussion. But I would assume that it would be, subject to that, because it is nothing more than a chat. It just happens to be a chat with yourself. So if that's something that is going to make a difference in the type of things you put out there, you may want to rethink using that particular option. But really good question. And if somebody knows the answer, feel free to chime in on chat there. Sharing your calendar external. This is a nice feature, again, Teams or Outlook client. If you've got somebody you're working with externally and you just kind of want them to be able to see your list of meetings you have, not specific what the meetings are for, but just to be able to see your free time and your availability, so they can say, hey, I want to meet at this time, I see you're available. So what you can do is you're in Outlook, you go to the Insert tab and click on Calendar. And it's basically saying I'm going to, and in this case, you're in an email here, so you're doing Insert Calendar. It's actually going to then insert your calendar information in this message. You can specify what the date range is. I only want to share today. I only want to share availability so they can see free, busy, tentative time, and show time within my working hours. So I tend to work from 6 to 3 Pacific time. So if I were to do this, they would only see that availability between 6 and 3. I don't give them the option to book a meeting for me at 4:30 Portland time, knowing that that's going to be 6:30 my time here, and you're on my time now. So no, you don't get to do that. So this is something that works out really well for people. This is the view of what they get. They see the calendar, they see the legend for what the different times are down below, what's free, what's busy, and what's outside of working hours. So this is something that's nice. It's not along the lines of saying, hey, pick your choice of which meeting slot that I'm giving you an option to. This is just a nice way to let people know, here are my general time openings for that particular day or larger time period. Feel free to go ahead and let me know which one works for you. So going back to the one-on-one chat, that's going to be a real popular one. I would think that depends on how the policy is written. Does it say all electronic, or does it specify electronic between 2 or more people? Good question. Again, since we don't use the policies in our environment, I'm not that conversant on it. So that sounds like a really good delineation between what you may or may not get in the terms of using that policy. Thanks for that input on that, Jeff. Auto-suggested replies in Microsoft Teams. This one was actually kind of more controversial in our environment than I expected. So this is really simple. If you're in a Teams chat, and right now when I wrote this, the original one was for a one-on-one chat, but I think the roadmap either has it rolled out or it's in development and rolling out. They're also going to apply it to group chats. So you're going to have this same kind of thing. But it auto-suggests 3 replies. And in order to use that, like in this one, somebody said, thanks, I could just click on you're welcome. It automatically plugs your welcome in and sends it. I don't have to actually type anything. I don't have to click on the send icon. It's just out there right away. Some people are like, this is creepy. How come it knows what I'm going to use? Well, it does kind of learn what your suggestions are, what kind of responses that you normally give. But again, they're all really short, 2, 3, 4 word replies. Some people are like, I hate this. I want to get rid of it. Well, actually, you have the ability to do that. If you go into your mail settings under General, you do have the ability to turn Teams. You do have the ability to turn suggested replies off. So if you don't like them giving you those items or those things to click on, feel free to go ahead and turn it off. Again, whatever works for you. If you like them, which I do, I like having them out there. It makes responding to things much more quick. Feel free to keep watching the chat for more information about tenant level security settings on, oh, that's for his. Other options for scheduling with people whose calendars you cannot see, find time meetings, polls, and bookings, find time. And actually the find time, the Microsoft add-on for Outlook, it is becoming a part of the default Outlook client. So that's a possibility too. So if you can't get it to work in your particular scenario, there might be some security settings that are impacting that. This was something that was a really quick tip, and my wife, who sits in the room right behind me, because we both work remote, and that is when you're doing chats in Teams, it's really frustrating when you want to have a little bit of spacing between two lines out there. If you hit enter, it sends it right away. You don't really have a choice. However, if you use shift enter, what shift enter does is that actually gives you a line feed in your chat. So in this particular case, I typed in, this is my first line. I did shift enter, took me to the second line without sending it, hit shift enter again, so I had a blank line between the two, and then hit my third line. And then I could just, click send or hit return. At that point, it actually sent. This really was a popular tip because people were frustrated over the fact that about the best they could do is go type it somewhere else in the format that they wanted and then paste it in here. This actually gives you a little bit of line feed formatting that you didn't have just by using regular enter. There is more discussion going on with retention policies for Teams, so feel free to follow along in the chat, and I will keep going here so we can stay on schedule. Adding time zones to your Outlook calendar on the web. We can actually do this in the client, so I'm going to show what it looks like on the client side too. This is really critical for me because, again, I happen to live in Central but work on Pacific. And a lot of times my wife will send me a calendar entry for something that we're going to do that evening, which is at 6 p.m. Central Time, but it's going to show up at 4 p.m. on my calendar at work. And sometimes hard time zones are hard and I don't do a really good time with converting. So what we can do here is under the calendar settings, you can go into calendar, you can go down to time zones, and it gives you the ability to say, okay, this is my calendar and I want it to display in the time zone of Pacific, which for me is where I live. When I step into my office in the morning, I'm on Pacific time. But I would also like to be able to see what that equates to in Central Time, which is my real time zone I live in. So I can click for a different one, add time zone, and I went ahead and put Central out there. Show it in the calendar. I label it as MCO because I want it to be Minneapolis, and I click save. What that ends up giving me then is this 2-column display. I like to put Portland in the second column because that's closest to what my time zone is for what I'm actually doing. But I also have the ability to cross-reference as to, oh, my 1 p.m. meeting is actually 3 p.m. Central Time. How close am I getting, to have to go to a dental appointment that's at 3 p.m. my time? What is that actually my Portland time? That would be 1 p.m. So it helps me make those shifts. The nice thing is too, is I had the ability to add additional time zones. So I could have had a third time zone. Let's say I worked with an offshore group. I could have had that particular time zone in there. So it's a nice way to be able to keep track of all the different times without you having to make the mental shift at all times. If you're actually using the Outlook client, you can go into Outlook Options Calendar. You have time zones here. This only allows you to have up to 3 time zones. If you want to have more, you'll probably have to use the calendar on Outlook on the web. But again, you have these same options here. If this is something where you have to work and talk with different groups in different time zones, you may want to take a look at actually using this particular option. Formatting, yeah, the formatting, if you do use the formatting button in your message, you can get really nice with colorful fonts and text sizes and the whole bit. This is real quick just for the shift enter for that quick. I want to get a couple line spaces in there. So that was a cool one. And thanks for the chat questions and the comments in there. I really appreciate it. This is one I think that was sorely needed for a very long time because by and large, when people would publish a page to SharePoint Online, you really didn't have a clue as to when that page was put out there. Was this information done yesterday, or was it done 2 years ago and it's probably dead by now? If you're the person who has full control access or probably design level or something like that, you do see this publish date on there. But for people who can only read the page, they don't see that. And there's no way for them to tell when was this page last updated or published. You're just kind of hoping that they put something on the page to let you know what that is. Well, that's now fixed. So I've got this page. I go ahead and put it in edit mode. And then when I edit the web part, it gives me the ability to come down here and show publish date and turn it to yes. So now what happens when I go ahead and save this page, publish this page, I end up seeing this publish date right underneath the page title. Again, to me, that is like critical. I think every page should have that turned on, just so you have an idea of finding out how old is this content. Can I take it as being something current that I need to pay attention to? Or is it something that I really want to question because it hasn't been updated in 2 years and the information is probably stale or obsolete entirely? So I would recommend that you use that if you're doing a lot of page design and page publishing in your site. Give people a clue as to when this information was actually last updated. Seeing the order of raised hands in a Teams meeting. This is really nice when you say, hey, does anybody have any questions? And 10 hands go up all at once. And you're thinking, I don't know who was first. And you kind of have to guess, and it's not always great. Well, now what happens is when multiple people raise their hand, it actually lists them in the order that the hands were raised. This is really nice too if you're having some sort of a contest where you're saying, okay, a trivia contest, here's the trivia slide, raise your hand when you know the answer. This is going to allow you to see which hand went up first, and you don't have to guess or keep a really close eye on the people list. It's going to tell you those. And then, in this case, when I'm having my meetings that we do every week for ask me anythings for different various things, I can just say, okay, do we have any questions? The hands go up, and I answer. As I answer them, I go ahead and right click and just lower their hand. So I can keep the latest one or the newest one up at the top and just call on them in the order that they came in. I really like this one. Can we turn the page publishing date on by default across all pages? I'm not really sure. It's been long enough since I've gone out and done a brand new page that I don't remember if that was actually turned on by default. Yeah, I'll see if I can look that up, and I may be able to respond back before the meeting ends and see whether or not that's a all or nothing thing that you can turn it on or leave it off or go from there, whether it's one that you have to do on a piece by piece basis. Of course, I find in situations like that, I'll go, oh, this is great. It should be on for everybody. And then as soon as I turn it on for everybody, you get half the people going, I don't like that, turn it off. And so you're going to only make half the people happy at any given time. So I would like to see it turned on by default for everybody. I just think that's good practice, but I'm not sure whether or not you have a choice to do that in your environment. Grammar and spell checking on SharePoint Online Modern Pages. This is another thing that was really needed. You could be in Word, you could be creating new documents, you could have grammar checking turned on, spell checking turned on, and it made your document look great. However, when you're creating a SharePoint Online page and you're putting content out there, you would find that half the stuff that you had could be misspelled. You've got bad grammar unless you had somebody double check it for you. You may have a page out there that looks very unprofessional. Well, now the grammar checking and the spell checking is turned on. So if you're typing text, like in this particular text box that I have, if I see a blue underlined, that's going to tell me I've got a grammar issue. In this case, spell checking should have had a hyphen in it. And if I click on spell dash checking in there, it'll automatically plug that in. For things that are underlined in red, which is very common for like Word documents and things, that's telling you that the word appears to be misspelled. And what you can do is get a list of the particular alternative spellings or what it thinks it may need to be, and you can just click on the correct word and it will substitute that in for you automatically. So this is something, again, that makes things look much more professional for you, and you don't have to do anything to get that. I was very happy to see this one show up in our environment. Changing your calendar time frame or your time scale in Outlook for the web. This is one of those things that, depending on how you manage your calendar and how much detail that you like to see, this is a really good way to format your calendar in a way to address some of those things. So again, I'm in Outlook for the web. I go out to my settings for calendar and I look at time scale. So in this particular case, I like to run with a 30-minute time scale, which means that my meetings are going to block out in 30-minute chunks. So I'm seeing I've got a couple 30-minute meetings here. One of my Ask Me Anythings is an hour, so it takes up 2 of the time slots. However, when I look at my options here, I can do 60 minutes, which doesn't give you a whole lot of detail at all when you're looking at the actual, week at a glance type calendar. Or I could go clear down to 5 minutes. That gives you a whole lot of time and a whole lot of space to see what you've got written in your calendar entry. However, it means you're going to do a ton of scrolling up and down to look at all your entries for the day. 6 minutes, I kind of thought, why 6 minutes? That seems awful random. I believe in the legal field, a lot of times that they charge based on 6-minute increments. So I believe that the 6-minute total that you have there is kind of a nod to the legal industry, and that's why they have that particular thing. But again, play with this a little bit to see exactly what you would like to see for your calendar. If I remember, this is where I changed to 15 minutes. So I can now see a whole lot more information in each calendar block. Again, if you just like to see, a day at a glance, that you don't like to do your entire week, this may not really come into play for you because your calendar is going to be wide enough that you're going to see all the information. But again, if you're a week at a glance person like I am, this will give you a little bit more flexibility for seeing what kind of information that you have in each calendar entry without you having to go in and open it up. It doesn't apply to the Outlook client, and unfortunately, you can make this change in the web-based version. I was hoping it would carry over to the client, and it does not. So you're kind of stuck there on that one. Looking at chat, for the grammar and spell checking, it is powered by Microsoft Editor, which is used among a lot of different things out there, such as Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, or SharePoint. So that's a great thing to look at, and you can go and check, what grade levels you want. As Michael's pointing out there, you can do what kind of grammar checks that you want. So you can either go really heavy duty, I want everything grammar checked, or you can say, yeah, I just want to leave everything in a conversational tone. Don't try to grammar check me for business usage and stuff like that. Michelle, somehow I have mine defaulted to 10 minutes, makes for a great day. Yeah, you have 6 lines taken up for an hour meeting. So pinning a chat message to Microsoft Teams. This is a nice feature, especially if you've got busy chats where you want to make sure that something that you put out there is actually being seen by people. So right now, this is for one-on-one and group chats. You have the ability to pin a chat message to the top of the screen. So in this particular one, I'm showing a chat with Sandra Mahan, my former coworker, unfortunately. And what I did on one of her chat messages that she had out there, I wanted that pinned to the top of the screen because it was something to talk about taking on call, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss that. So if you just hover over that, click the ellipsis and click pin, then what you get is this pinned message across the top. that stays up there. So as you go back and forth, scroll up and down, it's not going to fall off the screen. There was a feature that they had before this, which allowed you to like bookmark a particular chat message. And I thought, oh, that's great. It'll stay on the page. No, it doesn't. It just means you have to go out to the bookmark particular application or selection to see all the ones you bookmarked. This actually leaves it front and center. And again, if you have a really busy chat, especially if it's a group chat with a lot of activity, this may be the message that people need to see to act upon in the next 2 days. I used to say, yes, this is where you would put your message for there's donuts in the break room, but nobody goes into a break room anymore. So yeah, maybe you can say there's donuts in my kitchen that you want to put up there. But this is a great way to get that information stored out there. If you want to pin a different one, you could once again select the message, say I want to pin it. It does let you know that you can only pin one message at a time. So it'll say the one that you're about to pin is going to replace the one at the top. Do you want to do that? And if you click yes, then it actually replaces that up the top. And then if you're just done with it, period, click the ellipsis, unpin, and you're back to normal behavior. Very good way to make sure that people see important information. And again, really important if you've got busy chats that people are only checking into once or twice a day and information scrolling by at a rapid pace. Good way to keep things checked. Looks like the chat is still looking okay. And unpinning the message, you do get another warning. This, I think, yeah, you can't do multiple. And let me see here. You can only have one pin chat at a time. It's only available for one-on-one in group chats. It's not yet available for channel conversations, which I'm hoping will come out soon because, again, if you have a channel conversation going on in Teams, things can be scrolling by really quickly. There may be one message you want everybody to see in the channel. It would be nice to be able to pin that up at the top. So I'm hoping that makes its appearance here relatively soon. Hide your own video in Microsoft Teams. Some of us don't like looking at ourselves. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but this was really popular in our environment when I shared it. And there is actually some science behind it. When you're in a meeting and everybody's showing videos, there's all these moving images going on, and your brain's having to work to try to keep everything in check or process everything and not have things being distracted on the left and right side. If you see your picture out there, you tend to focus on yourself, which can cause more mental stress because all this thing's going on. Plus I see my own picture, which I'm going to look at. What you can do is use the hide for me feature in your Microsoft Teams. So here's a video. I've got my face turned on. I don't like to be looking at my face. So what I can do is I can right click on this image and go hide for me. What it does is it actually drops my image down or my video portion down into the lower right hand corner with a little up arrow. This only hides it for me. So if I decide to hide my video, it's not hiding it for everybody else that's on the call. If you wanted to hide it from everybody else on the call, then you just wouldn't be sharing your video. You would just turn your camera off and you'd be fine. But this is a really nice way to reduce some of the mental strain. If you have a lot of people sharing videos, go ahead and close that off if you're not comfortable with seeing yourself speak. Other people like the feedback of saying, oh, does it look like I'm actually looking? Do I have, you know, an eyebrow sticking out in 14 different directions here? So you do have the option to be able to turn that on and off. Looking over here at chat, do pinned messages display for guests now too? For a while, it appeared they did not. I don't know. I've never had this come up with somebody that I've been sharing with external as a guest. So I don't know that there's been any changes that I've read. So I would work on the assumption that it probably still does not if it wasn't doing it before. Jeremy, you can pin conversations within channel. That may be something new then that has come out since I last did this one, which is good to know. I see the 15 pin limit pretty stressful because I have to change the importance of people. We should automatically have the top 10 I communicate with pinned and then option to pin 15. I'd be fine with that design. Interesting. When you say the 15 pin limit, Michelle, is that pinning on the left side for the conversations, not pinning the chat message?
No,
to
that's
the top
the chat.
of
Yep.
In the chat. Okay. Oh, the chat on the left side navigation.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. I'm like, you can't pin 15 messages out there. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, that I think I'm up to like 7 or 8.
Yeah,
it
and
would
I've
be
got
nice.
I've got 15, and every time like I might be doing something new with some of the new project, I want to pin them, but I have to go through my list and determine who now isn't as important, which is like, you know, it's a hard to make that change and go, oh, I am going to remove you now.
Yeah. And a lot of times I've got ones that are pinned because it's like my boss or my lead or my coworker or a group chat amongst those people. I want to be able to see, yes, this is out there right now. I need to respond to it right now. So yeah, that would be a nice change. Feel free to go look at Feedback Portal and make that suggestion. Muting notifications during a Teams meeting. This one was really nice for me because I would be like trying to respond to chat messages in the lower left or lower right corner, and notifications would pop up of like, oh, somebody just sent you a chat message and something else that's going on. And it would overlay my chat window, and I'd be trying to clear those off, get back to chat. Another thing would pop up. It just is very distracting if you're trying to monitor, type in chat responses and not get things overlaying that process. What you can do is in Teams, you can go up to your menu bar at the top, click More, and if you go clear down to the bottom, you have the ability to mute notifications. This allows you to mute notifications for your meeting or this meeting only. It's not going to be a full-on mute it for everything or mute it for any meeting that you happen to be in. If you want to do that, you then go down to allow, or if you want to turn it back on, get to the other one in just a moment. If you want to turn it back on, you can just click on mute notifications again, and it would then go back to allow notifications. So it's kind of a toggle on and off for how you want notifications handled for that meeting. If you want it to happen for all meetings, again, go into Team Settings, Notifications, Meetings and Calls. I tend to like to go in and control for my meetings and calls. I'll click Edit, and this says here you can actually mute the notifications. Here's some different scenarios that I can do muting with for start notifications, chat notifications. You can play with these to get what happens to work best for you. Fortunately, they don't give you a, hey, this is what everybody's going to do. But again, notifications, this will work much better. I know that Dawn pointed out today that there is another change coming in the roadmap where you're going to start having notifications all appear at the top of the screen, kind of in a drop-down list. So if you get a message that says, hey, bad network quality, then there'll be a little bubble below that that says, Bob just joined the call. And then there may be another meeting below that saying, you know, so-and-so just put something in chat. So you don't have them appearing all over the screen. They're all going to appear in a more condensed fashion up in the upper center area. So this will change here shortly. Again, I think that was probably August that it was supposed to roll out. May have been September, but it's coming soon. So you may start seeing things appear differently for how stuff is going there. How are we doing with time? We've got about 15 minutes left. I think I'm doing okay. Increasing your chat density in Microsoft Teams. This is something that they came so close to getting it right. And I love the concept, but it's just one little thing that I would have wanted to add to it to make it perfect. So a lot of people have said, gosh, there's so much white space when you're chatting with somebody. And yes, there is. There's, you know, your stuff is going off on the right. Their stuff is going to the left. You've got all these big, you know, gaps here. Yeah. So let's say that you want to do something that makes this a little easier to read. What you can do is you can go to your team setting and you can pick your chat density. Now, I love comfy. Comfy is what you've got by default, but you can go to compact, which reduces a lot of the white space. So what you have is everything is like a one-liner, very easy to see. The thing that I hate, though, is that it doesn't always put the date and the time of when the message came in from the other person. So you see my first lines here, the Jessica sent something. I don't see the date time. I don't see the date time for Jessica down here. The only timestamp I see is when I put something there. So this is kind of worthless for me because I can't see exactly when they sent me this message, which to me is really important. I would love to see them fix that to where you had timestamps on everything. If they did that, this would be perfect for me. I would use this all the time. But that may not be necessary to you. You just may like having less white space out there. Feel free to go in and look at a more compact setting for your chat densities. So chat gap doesn't look as bad in dark. Yeah, I use dark mode for my teams. One thing I don't like about the compact is it took away the chat bubble outline. That's a different thing too, yeah. So again, to me, this would have been perfect if they had just done something slightly different. But yeah, right now I'm still using the comfy, so I've got a lot of white space sitting out there. Yeah, timestamps do appear in compact if you hover over the message. I'm lazy, I don't want to do that. I just want to be able to look at my screen without having to run my mouse over it. So yeah, you can get there. I just would prefer see it there without trying anything. And Jeremy, I like the left to right comfy density. Maybe I'm more used to it. Yeah, a lot of people, this is what I started with, this is what I'm used to, and they go with it. As I tell people sometimes, like, well, what's better, this way or that way? It's like, yeah, whatever you started with, whatever works for you. So. Apply to specific chat messages. This is something that a lot of people have asked for. We also got a lot of, well, Slack allows you to do this. So now you can do it in Teams. It used to be that if you replied, you just had to type in a new message, which your new message may come in 2 hours after the initial message was sent. There's been other stuff in the middle. And pretty soon you're not sure when you read a message, is that responding to what was just typed right above it? Or was that something that was typed 2 hours ago? So what you can now do is you can go ahead, hover over the message, click on the ellipsis, and you can reply to a specific message in a chat. And what's nice about that is it actually takes the text of what the message was and allows you to then put your response out there. And when it shows up on the screen, you now have the context to, hey, I'm responding to this particular message. This only works for chats with individuals. It does not reply to conversations in a Teams channel yet, unfortunately. So this is something that I highly recommend that you use because it will make the lives of the people who are reading your content much easier, especially, again, if it's a highly active group chat that's going on. You're going to want to be able to make sure that people know exactly what you're responding to. Using the read aloud feature. This is nice for people who have vision issues, or if somebody sends you, a copy of War and Peace in your email and you don't want to sit there and try to read it, or perhaps you're in a situation where you're in a car, because there are some features that allow you to have your mobile device actually read you emails without you having to do hands-on and be looking at it. But if you do want to use this accessibility feature for read aloud, you can go out to Outlook options, click on accessibility, and it shows you the ability to turn on the read aloud feature. When you get that, I could say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and click on this particular email. I see this read aloud button up here in the menu bar. And then when I click that, it starts reading it. It gives you this nice bar here, so I can either fast forward through certain things, or I can back up to certain things. I can stop. What's also nice is it gives you different options for how you want to read. So if you click on or how you want to hear it. So if you click on the options here, you can speed up the reading pace, you can slow it down, and they have different voice selections. So Microsoft David. If you want to hear it with a woman, there's some female options out there too. This isn't something that you would necessarily use all the time, but you may have some scenarios where you want to hear the email, you're distracted and have to be looking at something else. This is a good way to get the content without you having to be reading it and focusing on that particular thing. And again, if you have vision issues, this is another good way to get the content of an email without you having to struggle through trying to read it if they put really small fonts in there or something like that. So dyslexia, that's a really good option. I hadn't thought about that one. Yeah, if you've got a friend who's dyslexic, doing the read aloud feature probably helps tremendously. Good call out. Thank you for pointing that one out. OneDrive now has photo editing capabilities. No, I did not put this in there knowing that I was going to be following a OneDrive particular session, but I think this is really cool because it sort of takes away a bit of the need to have a third-party editing tool, and you definitely don't have to do a download it, make your changes in the tool, and then pop it back up, provided you don't need to do some really heavy-duty things. So it does handle JPEG and PNG formats. So in this, I've got a picture out there it's in a JPEG format. I can click the edit option when I call up the picture. This was some headshots that we were doing at the duplex we were living in at the time. And once I do the edit option, I can now rotate it slightly. So if I want that, very professional, I look at it, I can do that. I can rotate the entire thing. I can flip it to where it looks like I'm looking at the other direction. I can crop it down if that works for me. The crop handles is nice if you want to narrow down what particular point. So if I wanted a true headshot, I could crop out my entire body really simply and then save it, and I would have that nice cropped out version at that point. It also has some filters built in, so you can adjust brightness, contrast, highlightings, vignette if I wanted to have that nice, round fade out into nothingness look there. This is, again, something that normally you would have had to download it, put it in something like Snagit, play with the different editing capabilities to get the filtering and the brightness and all those things. Now you can just do it directly within OneDrive, which is really nice. Plus, it does have some preset filters, much like if you're playing around in your phone. So you can do warm contrast, calm it down, go black and white if you want to appear artistic with it. Again, some really nice features to allow you to use OneDrive for imaging without you having to go to a different Where's the hat on this one? Nice, Hal. Yeah, this was prior to the hat. This was prior to Tamara, my wife, and I getting married in May, which was when I brought out the hat for that. So yes, this is a hatless one. Adding collapsible sections. This makes a lot of difference in being able to have a page that looks great and minimize the scrolling if people don't need to wade through all the content. So in this particular case, I'm going to create some collapsible sections on my modern SharePoint web page. So I go ahead and just create a regular column, much like normal. And when I look at the options over here on the right-hand side, I have the ability to make this section collapsible. And I also have the ability to say, do I want to have this expanded when I go into the page, or do I want to have it collapsed? Now, we look at the actual content in the section, you'll see where you have the ability to put the section name out there. I highly recommend that you put the section name or something in there, because otherwise it's not terribly intuitive for you to know that there is actually a collapsible section there. So in this particular case, section name, I filled in some information. This is my collapsible section. I could put whatever I wanted here in terms of images or text web parts, the whole bit. And I wanted this collapsed when I first open the page. So when I open, actually I have, by default, it's going to show as expanded. I had it turned off to collapse. In this particular case, when I open up the page now, it's going to say this is my expandable section. You'll see the arrow where you can expand or collapse it. It's got all my information in there. I'm sorry, going back here, I actually did. Okay, let's go back. There we go. I was right. This is actually telling me, I thought I had already saved the page at this point. This is default display. It's actually going to open collapsed. So when I then actually publish the page, when it opens up, this is my expandable selection or section. If I want to see it, I can click on the down arrow, and that's actually going to then expand everything out there. This is great if you have like maybe an FAQ where you want to have information, but you don't want them to have to read through every FAQ to get to the content towards the bottom. Just create a page that has collapsible sections, have it display in a collapsed state. The question is what you have as your collapsible section title, and then they want to see the content, they just expand it and open it the piece that they want. Jeff, love this feature, been waiting for the collapsible feature. We can't do this in emails yet, right? That is correct. I have tried to do that and I can't make it happen. The hillbilly tabs. Somebody reads Mark Rackley's stuff. Yeah, Mark Rackley, who is very well known in the industry, he had done a post on how to do tabs, and he called them hillbilly tabs because he's in Arkansas. On a page, so you would have tabs across the top of the page. You could click on the tabs to show basic information. So, you know, if you clicked on one tab, it would show you part of the page. If you clicked on the other tab, it would show a different part of the page. It did have some, you need to do some coding on that. You need to have libraries and stuff like that. It's a little bit more complicated than just out of the box. And yeah, this actually does do something. It's like horizontal hillbilly tabs instead of across the top, so, or vertical hillbilly tabs instead of horizontal across the top. So this is a really good one. I love the call out for hillbilly tabs. That was great. Mark will love that when I talk to him next. This was one that I really loved because I do these tips internally. And so when I write them up, I do the text and then a screenshot and then the text and then the screenshot. Well, it used to be that because text was text and web part or images were images, you couldn't put everything in there at once. I'd have to go, okay, I've got 5 text pieces and 5 images, so I need to go put 10 text or 10 sections out there and then set it up and do text, image. Well, now what you can do is you can put a text web part in there, copy text and images, paste it in there. In this case, I took a Word document that I had some text, an image, some more text. And when you paste it in, it actually pastes both the text and the images into the text web part. So much easier when I do these now. I can write up everything in my OneNote notebook for the particular tip, and then I just copy over everything I did, open up a text web part, paste it all in there. It's great. This also gives you the ability for your images to say, looking at the toolbar here, do I want it to be left justified? Do I want it to be right justified? Or do I want it to show up in the middle of the screen? So you have a little bit of alignment to work with there too. But again, the ability of not having to make separate sections for every single text and image web part, and if they're alternating, you'll be there forever. This makes it really easy to get all the content out there at once. And here's what it shows up. You can also, if you left justify it, it also wraps the text around on the right-hand side. So that's another option that you have. You also have the ability to caption things, which is good. I will admit I don't do it a lot, but this again, great way if you're doing a lot of page design or page content that has both text and images mixed in together. So this is the way the page is out there. Highly suggest trying this. Do we know if those images are still dynamic and still show up properly on mobile? I would have to go look. I think that they are dynamic. I think that they are responsive. So yeah, I would have to go out and look at my my page here on my mobile client. But I think when I have done that in the past, they actually do show up properly. They may not necessarily wrap the text very well, but it would probably drop the text back underneath the image at that point because you've got a much narrower screen. And the last one user voice to roll them all. Feedback from Microsoft 365. If you've been around for a while, you probably remember user voice, which was the tool that Microsoft used for gathering feedback on various offerings that they had. So Word had a user voice, SharePoint had a user voice, everything had a user voice, but they were all disconnected. Some of them you had user voices, some of them didn't. It was a third-party offering, which Microsoft kind of wanted to bring it all back in-house, if I remember correctly. So they actually created a new tool called Feedback for Microsoft 365, or the Feedback portal. And now, if you go out there, you have all the different offerings out there in one place. And you can go ahead and click on search for whatever you want the title to be, or go out and click on whatever forum that you want to talk about or want to look at. And when you get those, you'll see the different tips that are out there. So let's say that I'm looking at something in SharePoint and it's like, boy, it would be nice if Microsoft did X. So I could go out to the SharePoint forum and I could then search to see, hey, has anybody else submitted a suggestion for this particular thing that I want to do? When I look at these tips, you'll see that up here in the upper left corner of each tip is a little arrow, and that's how you can upvote a particular item. So you look at this and go, oh my gosh, I really want to have this. I'm all in favor of it. This you'll see enable user to reply specific messages, which we talked about a little earlier. This was really popular. 52,000 people wanted it. So people upvoted it. And then Microsoft sees this because they pay attention to it very closely. And they will then go out and say, oh, this is a really popular thing. We need to look at getting it into our roadmap. This doesn't mean that it's going to get fixed. It doesn't mean that it's going to get implemented. Sometimes Microsoft says, hey, this is a great idea, and then it sits there for a very long period of time. But this is the best way to go out there and actually put something out there to get Microsoft's attention, have other people let them know, hey, I put this out there, please go upvote it. And again, the more votes it gets, the higher up in the attention level it gets to Microsoft, and hopefully eventually it gets to the point where they're saying, yes, we would like to go ahead and implement this, and they'll start working on it. So you click this, you'll see a check mark once you've actually voted on it. I would say it's a very good idea for you to kind of do a little bit of searching to see if anybody else has submitted an idea similar to that. So if you have 10 different people who have submitted their own question or their own suggestions on, give me more pinned channels in a chat. Well, yeah, but now you've got the votes for this same idea spread out about 10 different people, and nothing's going to rise really quickly because it's splitting the vote. If you find one that looks like what you want, go ahead and put a comment on it, add a little variation to it, say, hey, and if we had this, this would be great, but make sure that you're upvoting the one that has the most votes so it continues to rise in terms of visibility for Microsoft. Highly recommend that you check this out and use this for any ideas that you might have. I like to use it when people say, does Word work like XYZ? I'm like, no, but you could go out to the feedback portal and actually see what it is. Does anybody else have that idea out there? Or I'll go find the idea that somebody submitted and send them a link to it and say, no, but it's been suggested by somebody. Please go out and upload this. And that's the best way to hopefully get it in front of Microsoft to be put higher up on the development scale. So, and with that, that was 20. I finished a little bit over. Darn it. I will hand it back over to you, Michelle.